In this Matrix 7.5 video, we're going to explore using Rhino History to create this simple twisted bypass band. This is something that is typically very easy to create. However, it usually lacks a lot of functionality in terms of how we can manipulate this. In this example, you can see I can rotate these individual ends around. I can move them in, around, etc. I can also use my gumball here to scale this particular object up and down, and because of Rhino History and the way this was built, this is possible. So let's take a look at how we go about making that. And this involves a pretty heavy tree. You can kind of see what's happening here. So let's go ahead and explore how I created this. All right, so we're just going to go ahead and delete everything. Now, as I started this off, you saw I had several blends and points out there. So the way that I began doing that is I set up through my curve menu, and it is single line with both sides. Okay, and the only reason I did this, we'll turn on my quad point, was to just simply create a size reference for the thickness of my band. All right, and then I could just simply create a copy of this to get my thickness. So as I do this, this is merely for layout purposes, your own design. But as you saw, because of history, I don't have to be too particularly perfect with it, because I can indeed set this up however I want. So those are just reference lines, and what I'm going to do with that is I'm going to create that single line command again, and we'll use all 4 viewports to our advantage. I am going to create some very basic tick marks that we are going to use for blend. And when I do this, I want to make sure I don't snap to anything. So I could create these as copies, but ultimately I want these to be 4 independent blends. Alright, so now there are the starting of our tick marks. So now that we have those created, we have to go ahead then and create the blend tick marks that we used up top. So there's any way that we can go about doing that. I can kind of use the same technique that I did to create the ones on the bottom, just give myself a couple of reference lines to snap to. So I think I'm going to go ahead and do that. And I am going to, let's see, hold down Alt to defeat my O snaps, and again I'll set my height, and you can see the way that I drew that. This one is going to be inside the stone, so we'll move this one out, and then we will make a copy of that. Again, if you've watched the intro video, you know when you use the HUD, if you tap the Alt key, that makes a copy. So now that is there, I can move these up or down. You can see I'm a little bit off my ring rail, so let's move those down a little bit. And I'm getting a message that I broke history because these are copies of one another, which I'm only using them as reference, so I really don't care that my history has been broken. Alright, so again, we will snap and hold down Shift. Same thing. The length of those doesn't really matter because we're only using them to blend to. Alright, so now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to delete those reference lines that I created. Alright, again, those were only there for my use to create my blend marks in the appropriate area that I wanted. Alright, so let's go ahead now and start creating our blends. I'm going to change my layer color for this. So let's go up to our curve menu and use blend. Now if I want to create that twist, I want Let's go ahead and see. I want this one to blend to this one. And we'll kind of go around the way here. I'm just using my right mouse button to repeat my commands. So now it's time to create my blends. Alright, we'll use the blend command from our curve menu. And we want this one to blend into that one. And we'll just kind of continue following along here to create our So now it's time to create our blends. Let's go ahead and start this up. So we'll take this one and blend it to that one. And we'll use our right mouse button to repeat our commands. And you can see I'm just kind of following around in a pattern here to create my twisted band. Alright, so there we go. Now again, at this point, I have rails. I could start using these to create sweeps if I wish. Or I can use loft as well, which is now history enabled. But let's go ahead and create maybe a little bit of a rounded top. So I'm going to go ahead and again, I'm going to draw little tick marks here. I'm going to hold down shift to make sure I go straight down. Might have to use a couple of viewports to accomplish this. So we'll make sure we're snapped right to the end. Holding down shift. And again, these are simply for creating a small profile using blend. And again, if I use this technique, everything that I adjust, once we show you how to adjust this, everything blends together. So let's make our creation layer there, and let's do a blend curves again from here to here. And then we'll do another blend curve from here to here. Right. At this point, we have the basis for pretty much everything that we need to finish the ring. So let's go ahead and start filling some of this in. And we'll make a metal color, our active layer color. And let's go to surface, and let's choose loft. I'm going to loft between this curve and this curve. Press enter. Go ahead and say OK, because that looks pretty good. And we'll do another loft from here to here. Press enter. Alright. Now that we have that, we can go ahead and do a sweep 2 with sweep 2 as well. So I'm going to sweep 2 off of this curve and this curve. And we'll use this as our profile and press enter. So that gives us our rounded edge there. Let's do the same thing on the bottom now. Sweep 2 again. Curve to curve. This would be our cross section. Press enter. We can say OK. You can see we start to have our ring built here. Now, one of the things I like to do to make this a little bit easier to work with is if I select all 4 of these, I'm going to go ahead and group those together. Right, so that means when I select one of these now, I pick them all. The beauty of that is, if I do that, I can use scale on my gumball, for example, and I can scale those in or out to affect my ring. All right, same thing up here. When we do that, I want to make sure I grab not only these 4. We can go ahead and maybe hide some layers to make this a little bit easier. But we want to make sure we grab all of these bright green layers here. And again, we'll turn those into a group again. That way when I click on one, I update them all. And again, what that allows me to do then is if I select these, rotate them around, my ring is manipulated. Right? I can also scale this up and down a little bit if I think it's too wide, thick, or thin. Okay, and the next part here, to make this nice and easy, you may have noticed with mine, it was doing that on both sides. So I simply select all of my swept surfaces and lofts. And we'll go ahead and we'll do a rotate. We'll choose copy. And we will rotate this with a copy to one side from the next. So this swept surfaces here are a child of all of our swept surfaces there, because rotate with copy is history enabled. So if I were to grab this set of blend handles there, you can see as I move that up and down, my rotated copy is moving about. Alright, so go ahead and use sweep 1 to start finishing off the bottom here to get our start. So we'll choose sweep 1 and we'll pick our surface edges. That way I can use Rhino's sweep, press enter. And you can see we get that nice first portion of the bottom there. And I can do the same thing with the outside of it there. Okay. And then we'll do a sweep 2. And I'm going to use the surface edges of these two from this edge as well for my cross-section curve. Enter. Looks good. Do the same thing over here. Surface edge, surface edge. Cross-sections will be these right here. Enter. And OK. So by doing it this way, what happens is if I select one of my blends, if I move these around, you can see it not only updates the top portion, but it also updates the bottom portion as well, because this whole thing was all started off of these original blend marks. If we kind of talk back through how we did all of this, we'll hide some different materials here to make this easier. So these green lines were our originals. And then, based off those green lines, we created our blends. Alright? Not only the rails, but we also created our profile shapes that we use there. So these are all, again, dependent on these green lines. So the green tick marks, so to speak, were our starting point. And then we did a series of lofts in sweep 2 to create the top portion. And then for the other side, we did a rotate with copy. And then once we had that, we did a series of sweep 1 and sweep 2, again on the bottom portion, to create this. So everything started from our original sets of green tick marks. So meaning if I move these in any direction, rotate them, right, everything moves along and updates as it goes through. So when you start getting into some more in-depth models here, you have to go ahead and make sure you start yourself at the appropriate place if you're really trying to take advantage of Rhino history. Alright, so you can see the way I've built this particular model is everything is based off of those original bright green tick marks that I used. And to make my life easier, again, I group these all together. So when I click on one, I can move them all about, scale them together, etc. to make this very, very easy to manipulate. So this has been a more in-depth look at using Rhino history to your advantage. As always, there are much more history-enabled commands that I haven't even explored yet in the videos. So some of those you might have to experiment and play with yourself, but these should give you a starting point on using Rhino 5's history and Matrix 7.5 to its fullest advantage.